Live from Shore Manor Studios, this is Tales from a Small Town Journalist with Matt Shore.
Hey guys, thanks for checking out this episode of Tales from a Small Town Journalist, the podcast dedicated to all the weird and wonderful stories you are only going to hear about from reporters working in small communities just like yours. I'm Matt Shore, and I was one of those small town journalists for almost 10 years before I finally hung up my camera and my notepad. And in that time, I had some fun and unique and occasionally weird experiences dealing with the public. And I got to know a lot of other reporters who also had some unique, interesting, and sometimes weird experiences dealing with the public. Before I go any further, I do want to make sure and mention that this is a listener supported podcast supported by wonderful folks just like you. There are a handful of great ways that you could show some support. One good one would be to go check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/Matt Shore. I've got content going up there on a weekly basis. There's audio, there's video, or there's visual, and there's even a few stories here and there, some spooky tales, some comics, some sketches, all kinds of stuff. I keep that going up on a regular basis, and you can subscribe for as little as $1 a month. Pretty decent deal, I would like to think. So that'd be one fantastic way to show some support. Another would be go to visit my website, mattshore.net, where you can check out our shop there. We've got books, we've got t-shirts, we've got spooky comics, all kinds of great stuff there if you want to go show us some financial love on that side of things. Finally, a great way to show some support would be to just help spread the word about us. Get out there on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever channels you use to tell people about this kooky little podcast, its kooky host, and the kooky stories that we like to tell. This episode is, I guess you could call this the official anniversary episode. It was supposed to be last month's episode, but the tornado that hit my hometown, I thought needed to kind of adjust my plan a little bit because I wanted to tell people how they might go and help out any ways that they might be able to. And I still can, absolutely. If you want to go check out that past episode and find ways that you can just donate as little as $1 to help people out. And in fact, if you were thinking of supporting me financially at all, and if you feel more inclined to go help people down in Mayfield and any of the people that were struck by that tornado, then by all means do that. That definitely takes precedence over showing me any kind of support or love. So yeah, anything you can do for my hometown and the communities around it, just to help people get back on their feet, would be fantastic. So feel free to let that be your obligation over supporting me directly. But I guess that ended up being the unofficial anniversary episode. So I guess this is our official one, albeit later than usual. We're celebrating 3 years of this podcast, still going strong, still telling unique stories from journalists and reporters and occasionally other people. And it's with that in mind that I decided to take the direction I did with this one. I wanted to be a little bit different since it's an anniversary and it's a special occasion. I interviewed a friend of mine. He is not literally a journalist per se, um, never set foot in a newsroom to my knowledge, but he does have a perspective that we don't always hear. And I thought about this perspective a while back. It's been stewing in my head for a while, so some might say I'm late to the conversation with this. But when we recognize 20 years after 9/11, September 11th, 2021, there was a lot of talk, and I heard on more than one occasion, I heard people say, man, September 11th was awful, but September 12th, that was that really was wonderful. That was the one time I remember that America was united. I don't want to take away from that because it's not wrong, really. I mean, you can look at just straight up simple things like presidential polling at the time. I believe the approval rating for the president was 80%. We've never seen that since, that rally around the flag phenomenon. Not at that level ever since. I don't know if we ever saw it before. It was pretty amazing. And people rallied around New York City, wanted to be there to help them because they knew they'd been hit. The entire world saw it and wanted to help as well. And that was a wonderful thing. But there was another perspective that I knew about. I did not experience it. I knew about it from other people uh, in this specific group that were not allowed to feel that sort of amazing, camaraderie that we had. And that was people who'd lived their entire lives who were of Middle Eastern descent. Um, I was in college at the time. So you do the math on how old you think I might be. I very vividly remember students getting on and off. We had a shuttle bus service that took us from our dorms to the campus. I very distinctly remember uh, times that students who were, some of them weren't even obviously Middle Eastern. They just had skin that was just a little bit darker. And I remember school bus driver, this crotchety, grouchy old man, even before this happened. Uh, when they would get off, it's like he just slammed that door behind them, just so happy that they were off of his bus. And you hear stories from other people who experienced, they did not experience that sort of togetherness and unity that we like to talk about for September 12th. For them, September 12th kind of was a sad time. It was when it kind of marked the time for them that they were always seen as other, and they've never been able to get back to the way things were for them on September 10th. Um, and that's unfortunate. And this isn't. I didn't want to do this as some sort of pushback against this notion that September 12th was wonderful. It was, but it's just a perspective that I think needs to stay out there. I don't think we need to lose it. I think we need to recognize our flaws, our warts, and if people in our society are not, if they're being marginalized for things that really no reason is good, um, but especially when it's things that are outside their control, they couldn't help the fact that they were simply born looking similar to the people that hurt us. They had nothing to do with it, but they looked similar, and as a result, they had to deal with the fallout. And I mean, we haven't really improved. You can look to the early days of the pandemic. A lot of people of Asian ancestry had to deal with a lot of just flack and things simply because the virus originated in China, um, as far as we know. And still not totally firm on that, but we're fairly confident that's the case. But they, these people, one or two generations, not even from Asia, some of them nowhere near China, completely different nations, and yet they had to deal with just because they looked similar enough. And it's good. It's an ongoing struggle in our lives. Every generation, I'm sure, will face it. But anyway, I've kind of gone away off a bit, and it's just important to remember that perspective. And that's why I interviewed my friend Rumzi Yatim, who I got to know while I was in college right around the time this happened. I actually met him just before the September 11th attacks happened and kept knowing him in the days that followed for a couple of years before I finally left that part of the country. And we've stayed connected since. I'm not going to say that we're blood brothers or anything, but we stay connected thanks to social media and keep abreast of what's going on in each other's lives. And it was great to catch up with him again, but it was also great that he could offer that perspective on life in America for a certain group that does not get talked about a lot. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to bring that perspective to this. Now, first and foremost, this is a lengthy intro, I'm sure. So just a fair warning that this was a long interview. And I thought about different things to do. I could split it up, I could shorten it, whatever. But I think his perspective is very important, and I don't want to take any of it away. So this is going to be a lengthy episode. So, listen to it in installments, listen to a little bit of it, come back, or just whatever you can. Just, but listen to his stories because they're important. Um, it's important to know and to hear that side of things. So, without any further ado, I'll turn things over to the chat that I had a little while back with Ramzi Yatim. This episode is brought to you by Moby Dick: Back from the Deep, the webcomic chronicling the white whale's return in modern times as a zombified beast. This terrifying high seas adventure boasts more than 78,000 viewers, 4 successful Kickstarter campaigns, and numerous mentions on comic book and horror podcasts, e-zines, and more. Check out this monster's tale at backfromthedeep.com if you dare. Okay, for a slight change of pace on this episode, I'm joined by Ramzi Yatim, an old friend of mine from, we're not going to say how far back. It's been a minute or two. But want to say big thank you, Ramzi. Got a busy schedule from what we were talking about beforehand. So thanks for taking the time.
Oh, I know. Hey, thanks for having me, Matt. So it's a pleasure to be here.
All right, I appreciate it. We had talked about this beforehand, and so I'll just repeat it here, that we are going to, first, normally I interview journalists about their stories. Ramzi's not a journalist. He's in another line of work. We may get into that later. But there's one of the things I wanted to do, because with journalists, I've always thought it was important to get their perspective on things, because it's one that we don't often hear. They're always telling other people's stories, and we don't get to hear their own. Well, one story I thought we haven't heard a lot of is Ramzi. You've got a unique perspective on things, and I got the idea for this after the 20-year anniversary of 9/11, and there was a lot of talk about how united we were on 9/12, and I appreciate the sentiment of that. It is very nice, and for most of America, that was true, but there was a distinct section that not quite there. I'm not going to say they were just completely out, but there was a little bit of tension, I think. And
Sure.
I thought you could offer some of your own perspective on what that was like for you.
Sure. Yeah. So for those people listening right now, yeah, like Matt said, my name is Ramzi Yatim, and when I tell people that, I usually get oh, that's an interesting name. Where are you from? Right. So I'm Palestinian. My family's from a little town in Palestine called Bethlehem. May or may not hear about it in the next coming months, right? And so my family immigrated to the U.S. in the 80s. My sisters and I are all born and raised here, all U.S. citizens, and my whole family is U.S. citizens now, and been here since the 80s. And I felt like your regular kid growing up in the Midwest. Other than we spoke another language in the house, and my family had weird, funny traditions every so often. I didn't feel too much like I never belonged, or I was like an other, if that makes any sense, until 9/11. And right, as you mentioned, right, there's like this whole, let's get back to 9/12. There's like Glenn Beck launched like the 9/12 project back in like 2009, 2010. It was this whole push to be like, nah, no red states, no blue states, no black, no white. We're all like United Americans. And like you said,
Well, that
to
worked
a
out, didn't
degree.
it?
Yeah, no, he's got a real great track record for getting people together. And so, and to a degree, right, there was like this united front. However, being of Middle Eastern descent, there was a different experience. My family is Christian. That's always a fun topic to bring up with people too, because they'll see me eat a pepperoni pizza and they'll be like, "Hey man, like you're not allowed to eat that, right?" And I'm like, "Why can't I eat it?" And they're like, "Well, because religion, right?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you think I am?" They all automatically assume I'm Muslim. I'm like, "No, actually, like I grew up Christian, right? I no longer subscribe to a religion, but like I grew up Christian." And like, "Oh, when did you convert?" No, my family's from Bethlehem. Like my whole family's Christian. Like, "Oh, right on, cool. Like when did they convert?" And I'm like, "When you guys were pagans in Europe, man." Like, and to watch the confusion in their face that like, when I'm like, "No, we were OG Christians." Like my family's like literally right, like from Bethlehem. So that's always fun to watch. Americans' brains like, no, that can't be possible. So yeah, so then like, all right, so 9/11 happens, and then it was the next day, like the bullying started, the racism started, which was interesting to me that it didn't start on 9/11, because again, I was 11 years old, I was in 6th grade, kids had to go home, speak to their parents, the parents had to explain to them what is happening in our country, and then they learned the hate. Then they learned the next day when they saw me oh, this is your fault. Oh, like, oh, your dad's Osama bin Laden. Um, things I heard the next day, right? So it just goes to show like another one of those things like racism is taught. My dad had, several convenience stores in the St. Louis, North County area in St. Louis. And we had people who would walk in and be like, ask us, and we employed Americans. Like, it wasn't a family run business that only had like the cousins and the uncles and like us were like, no, we pretty much exclusively employed other Americans. And we'd have you walk in the store and be like, is this store Arab owned? And our, American employee would be like, yeah. And they'd walk right out. And so, yeah, it was, that was the start of, I'm never really fully American. I'm always Arab too. And that always kind of comes with this weird sense of like, I have to prove my loyalty or patriotism to America, more so than the average American does because of my ethnicity. And I was a Marine and I still have to do that. Like, that's something and jokingly, right, sometimes, had to do in the Marine Corps. I was an officer in the Marine Corps and I still, dealt with that sometimes. Not necessarily like, not as much in the military. We tease each other a lot in the military. That's like, just a cultural thing. But yeah, despite the fact that I, wore the uniform, to some people, I still have to prove that, my criticism sometimes of America, whether it is, cultural or political or whatever it is, right, which everybody has their 2 cents, their opinion on it, isn't inherently rooted in anti-Americanism. And I think it's something that like not just me, but other Arabs have to like go through on a daily basis.
And it's interesting you mentioned the change, because I was not on the front end of experiencing it in that way, but I sort of like I guess a fly on the wall is the best way I can describe it, because I distinctly remember a change in the mood. I was in college at the time. I was first time ever living outside of my home. I lived in this nuclear family, loving home. For a long time, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, cooking our breakfast and everything. And my mom, to this day, if I go visit, will cook a full meal for me. She's just that kind of a mom. And that's what I grew
Love
up
it.
in. And then the first year I move out of that, the biggest national tragedy in American history since like World War II
Right.
happens. But I distinctly remember a shift afterwards. People of certain ethnicities, sorry if I can get my tongue straightened out, there was just a tension there, and some didn't bother hiding it. I remember there was a shuttle that would take us from our dorms to the college campus, and I remember one time there was this crotchety old guy, and he was already grumpy before anything happened. But I remember some students that I guess he presumed were Arabic. Like when they got off the bus, like he maybe sort of just slammed that door behind them as hard as he could. And things like that just stuck out to me. And I just like, we're like half a continent away from what happened. Like they didn't have anything to do with it. Why are we mad at them? And
yeah,
it was my first experience seeing that type of racism is what it is, but it almost feels too strong to say that, because it's so like subtle and it's underneath, and a person doesn't see it as being racist,
right.
even though it very much is. And it was
the microaggressions almost, right?
There's the word. Thank you. Microaggressions. That's it. Yep. It was my first time ever seeing that directed at people, and I guess at least recognizing it, because I mean, there's every chance when I was 5 or 6 I saw it and just didn't know it.
Sure.
Yeah. But I've always remembered that change in mood.
Yeah, and listen, I'm not gonna sit there and try to be like, oh, woe is me, I had it so horrible. I mean, like I didn't experience, no one ever tried to like beat me up or anything like that. But I heard horror stories about like when I went to middle school and high school and following years after that, that Muslim girls were having their hijabs ripped off in the hallway, and and that's like something that happened all the time. And I was fortunate to grow up in not rural, insert whatever state, right, where you might have one Middle Eastern family there, and that's it. There was definitely more of a ability to hide, within like strength in numbers. So yeah, there's people that had it much more worse, but you saw it everywhere, not to like tell someone else's story, but it's my sister, so I'm going to do it. So you remember my oldest sister, Suzanne, right? She went to school at the church, a little private school we had there. And she, would experience it there. One guy, I can't remember which one it was, and I don't want to say names out here anyway, looked at her and was, I think this is like the lead up to the Iraq war. And he was like, I'm going to join the military and go overseas and kill your people. And it's like, first of all, they're not invading Palestine. So like, no, you're not. But also, right, like, but it doesn't matter. Arabs is just, we're all lumped into one, group. And I remember one time the boy said something to her, and she was out in the hallway crying. And the principal saw her, Andrew Conway, I don't know if you remember him, saw her crying and was like, Suzanne, what's going on? She explained, the guy was saying racist stuff to her. And she tells him, and he's like, how long has this been going on for? She's like, a year. And, a lot of times we don't want to start any trouble or cause any trouble. I almost never said anything. I don't recall if I ever said anything to the teachers about it. Like I always handled stuff on my own or between my friends. Like we don't want to get in trouble with stuff. And he's like, oh, it's been going on for a year. And he pulled the two boys into his office and he goes, if I ever hear about this happening again, you're expelled. Like not detention, not suspended. I am kicking you out of my school because I'm not dealing with that. So I like that story because one, right, it's like another example of the stuff they went through, but two, it also shows hey man, if you're someone within a position of privilege, of power, right, that's good allyship. He came to her defense. He didn't tell her, oh well, they're just stupid boys being ignorant, or just don't listen to them, don't pay attention to them, or didn't question her experience. He took her experience at face value, because there's no reason to, right, like why would she make this up? Catches her crying, and did something about it right there and right then. And so I really, those moments don't go unnoticed. That happened 20 years ago, and Suzanne still remember, and we still like think the world of this guy, because of that. Just like kind of small moment. He might forget about it. He might not remember that it happened, but like for me and my sisters, we're like, yeah, that was freaking awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty big.
Yeah,
I didn't know that story. So yeah, kudos to him.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I guess when you see like a teenage girl crying because someone's being racist about him, it's like, but yeah, he's a good dude.
It's good. I remember, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, and I don't want to say this guy's name just in case I get anything wrong. But while I was there was a guy who I don't know exactly what the story was, but he had been in the military and served overseas in Iraq, and he came back here, and I think there was some disillusionment that he was feeling right after returning. And like, because I distinctly remember when he first came back, he was happy, but over time, I think like he started learning things about that happened. And I think he started learning, one of the biggest things that he discovered was like the actual collateral damage of things that he had done. And like he said, he saw footage of like, I think children and infants who had been killed in some of the bombings that had happened. And he said, I think I might have dropped a few of those. And at one point, and I think the conversation I had with him was like, dude, you had orders. That was your duty. The ones responsible are the ones that told you to do it. And at the time, I'm like, I hope I'm telling him the right things.
Yeah.
My heart really went out to this guy because he really felt bad.
Yeah. I never experienced a combat deployment, so, I can't speak intelligently to that, or, I'm not going to make up or whatever, but I know from my friends who have served, there's like, or served in combat. Yeah. There's like so in the military, we teach burden of command, right? So like I was an officer in the Marine Corps. If I issue that order to pull the trigger, right? Like I told you to do that, that burden falls on me. So you shouldn't take that on. Now, it's something we preach, but in practicality, like you pull the trigger, right? Like that was ultimately something you did. And that's like, that gets into the human psyche of like, post-traumatic stress and stuff like that. And yeah, I can't imagine what it's got to be like especially when you come back you see that footage, and as we see with like time goes on, learning that like the war was on false pretenses, and so like wait, it's like, so all that was for what exactly? um but is that the guy who had the Jaguar? I remember thinking we were talking about, he was bald.
No, that was somebody else.
Oh, okay.
I don't think that
Got
guy
it.
served.
Never mind. I thought he did. I thought he was in the army.
I could be wrong.
Whatever.
I didn't know him that well.
It's been a long time. Yeah.
That war was really, I was never directly involved in it, but it had a really kind of profound impact on me. It shaped a lot of the worldview that I have today, ironically. One of the things, I've never forgotten this, at one point, I forget which news organization did this, but after a year, I don't know how many years in, 1 or 2, they decided to start posting they dedicated one page on their website to every soldier who had was dead or missing in action. And I went through and I looked at it. And of course, by then it's this endless list. I forget how many thousands it was. And of course, several thousand more before it was all over with. And the main thing that I remembered, I was like 21, 22 at the time. And I started, and it listed like, their name, where they were from, and their age.
And how old they are, yeah.
Everyone with like, I'm going to say 97%, because there were some exceptions, they were all younger than I was. And I thought, my gosh, I'm not that old. These guys are younger than me. And how many thousands of these kids are gone now? And that just, I was sitting alone in my bedroom, had my computer set up back when it was a desktop, if anybody remembers those.
Yeah.
Desktop computer. And there
was always like one in the house, because not everybody had one. Yeah.
I was scrolling down just each one of these names, and it was like, I don't think I had the lights on. The only light in that room, it's like a movie. The only light was that screen, and I'm just staring at those names, and it's a memory that has stuck with me, and it's why to this day, like, I was never a fan of war, but now I'm even that much less of a fan because of that one moment.
Yeah, I was recently in so I live just outside DC here in Arlington, and a friend was in town. We went to the Vietnam Memorial, and I don't know if you ever went there, but it's got names of everyone, right? And that is a very powerful one to see all the names of all those young men over there who died, and their ages. And you're like, good Lord, man, those numbers are high. But like going back to the Iraq War, it's funny because like, so you have the Iraq and the Afghanistan war. So going back on like the perspective of like growing up as a Middle Eastern post 9/11 America, the association with both of those wars to me is funny because like, I remember I was going to do the math on how far Afghanistan was from Palestine, but the automatic association between like, oh, you're Arab, so like you know a lot about like Afghanistan or like whatever, or like you guys like you can answer a question about like the cultural thing over there, right? And it's like, dude, that's like being like, oh, you're Canadian, you're from America. Like, can you tell me about this thing down in Belize or Venezuela? Because like it's America, right? And it's kind of, I mean, like, it's like super far away. So there was like a lot of like you get a lot of those stereotypes of like, oh, you should know, or like you should know. Like if someone has a question about like Muslim culture or something like that, they immediately go to me, and I'm like, I don't know. My family's Christian, guys, for the millionth time. Well, yeah, but like your family's from there, and it's like, yeah, but like even when like I know just as much as you guys do. We go to the same school, guys. We have the same crappy public school education, like, but like the assumption that like in Afghanistan is Central Asia, it's not even Middle East, right? It's like Central Asia. But yeah, that's like something I routinely just expect people to assume for me because it happens so frequently.
It makes me think about previous wars and how the people who were, the enemy, so to speak, in those wars felt that stigma like years to come. Because I feel like it's been 20 years since 9/11, and I still think there's that distrust that exists towards people who look like they're from Arabic, and
right.
It makes me think back to like World War II. For a long time, if you just gave a character a German accent, they were the villain. We didn't need anything else about them. All they had to do was All they had to do was say their W's as V's, and they were a bad guy. And that's all it took. But we've sort of, that's not the case now. That's kind of disappeared. And for a long time, Japanese, anybody of Asian descent was a villain for about the same amount of time. And that started to go away. The Russians, I think we do sort of distrust them again now. But
we still, it's coming, everything, and everything
all comes full circle,
right? Like it all starts to come back.
I've been wondering how long until we're cool with Middle Eastern people again, and then we find somebody else.
I wish I could tell you, man. No, that's like that's something that I got frustrated with, is like, seeing and that's why I think like representation matters in media, right? So like that's why I got hype about, or got really excited about Black Panther, was not because like I relate to that, right? Like I don't have the experience of being Black in America, but I understand what it's like to have to, like, I had Aladdin. Like Aladdin was it. Like I had like the one person on TV that was like me in any way, shape, or form that I could relate to was, and I remember even like going to church camp, like Aladdin was my nickname. There was my buddy Abdullah from high school. Like we used to get during Spirit Week t-shirts, and you could get like something custom like written on the back, like whatever. And his was Aladdin. And I was mad because that was taken. I wanted to do it because it would be funny. But like representation matters. So like when Black Panther came out and people were like, oh, don't get the hype. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like we don't get anything.
Helped that it was a great movie too.
I mean, it was just a phenomenal movie.
Gosh,
like
so good.
I could watch that movie any day of the week. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Everybody raves about Thanos. To me, Killmonger is the best Marvel villain, bar none.
Have you watched What If?
Yes, I have.
Killmonger was pretty. Yeah.
The thing about Killmonger is, unlike like Thanos, people like to say Thanos was right. Well, kinda, but he took it too far.
Yeah.
The thing about Killmonger, he was completely right. He did one thing wrong. Everything else, he was absolutely justified.
Absolutely. And that's funny because like I feel like those are the villains we want, or the villains that are like, we're like, well, wait a minute, they're not entirely wrong, right? Like
those are the best ones.
Those are the best ones, absolutely. So it's funny because like, and we're talking about like TV villains, right? If we do see an Arab on TV, they're probably the villain, right?
And they're probably going to hijack a plane.
Yeah, or they're a side character in Mummy. I remember the Egyptian guy in the Mummy, the dude who can't remember his name. He shows up on horseback and all black, right? He fights Brendan Fraser first, and then they become friends later. And I thought Brendan Fraser was awesome, because who doesn't love him in the Mummy, right? But like I was like, but that dude's actually like low key kind of like freaking awesome, and like he's the one. If I was in the Mummy, I'd want to be him. Because he's like this cool warrior, and he looks like one of my uncles, and so we don't see a lot of them, and I'm hoping to see that like change, and we see like things just take time, but yeah, for a while it was like just so normalized to see, Arabs just villainized on TV so casually, and that's like sad to say. I got used to that, but yeah, we're seeing societal shifts where it's like not okay just to villainize people based off of that stuff.
You're right, we are, and we're seeing better representation. And from my end, my frustration from, I'll just say my people, when I hear white men like myself complain, like one of the big complaints about Black Panther was like I would hear white family members say things like, well, your son can't be Black Panther for Halloween because that'll be construed as racist. And I'm just like, okay, listen, because my son loves Black Panther. I just want to say, listen, I'm not saying, yeah. Well, it's like, look, I'm not saying I'm thrilled that he probably can't do that without us dealing with it, but you have to stop and just ask yourself, why do non-white people feel such a just cling to this character so much and say this is ours and you can't have it? Right or wrong, ask yourself why. And part of it is why, well, let's just look at the other Avengers. We've had 29 Avengers movies. How many of them were a white male? Well, and like the last 5 or 6.
Forget about Avengers. We've had 50 different James Bonds. We have Indiana Jones. Farther. We have Rambo. We have John McClane. By the way, I love all those action stars, right? John Wick. Like I grew up watching all these action movies. but like, yeah, like there can't be one without being like, oh, why do you guys have to make it all about like race? And it's like, well, we're just like, it matters. It matters for kids to see someone on TV, you know, and be like, oh, I can do that. I can be that. Right. So yeah, it was, and it's funny because like I look back at SNL skits that I laughed at when I was 13, 14 years old. I look back at now and I'm like, oh, that's not going to hold up well. You know what I mean? Like, and it was just, at the time, it was okay to laugh at that.
You
It
can't
wasn't
litigate the
okay.
past. You have to.
Yeah. It wasn't okay. But it's just kind of funny to see how we got, you know, normalized to our experience of being discriminated against, or like, and so that's like where it gets tricky, because I learned to use humor as a disarmament tool, right? Like for me, like I'm probably gonna, and I'm like, right, very comfortable with cracking jokes about me being Arab or whatever. Like, and at this point, I know the difference between someone being legitimately racist and intolerant and, you know, someone just teasing me. And you got, it's a fine line to walk, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to like tell those people that genuinely feel those horrible, awful things when you joke about it, that it's okay to joke about that stuff, or it's okay to feel that way. Right. And so there is, like, to a degree, kind of a double standard. It's like, nah, I can joke about that. Like you and I can joke about that, Matt, because I know you don't mean any ill harm from it, but like someone else might crack the joke. And it's like, you kind of mean that a little too seriously, man. Watch what you're saying. So I have to learn how to watch my tongue, right? Because I don't want to accidentally enable someone into thinking these harmful stereotypes are okay.
Well, I think what we have to acknowledge is it's going to be, we're in the middle of it. It's a difficult process. It's going to continue to be difficult because we mentioned just the movies. If you go back, that's a century's worth of films. And if you go back even farther, you can see other stereotypes that were, you know, it's the word I'm looking for, reinforced. And so overcoming that took time, and that was messy. We've got past ones that we're overcoming now. That's going to take time. It's going to be messy. And 30 years from now, we'll have ones from today that I'm sure we'll look back on like just cringe. Oh my gosh. But it'll always be a messy process. And I think if there's anything people, whatever side they're on, have to acknowledge is like, look, it's going to be messy and we're going to make mistakes along the way. And even though, like, I'll just point to myself, I like to think of myself as an ally, but I'm an extremely awkward one. I'm going to stumble along the way. I've been called up for getting stuff wrong before. And I always just ask them, look, if I get it wrong, tell me, just do it gently. That's all I ask.
Yeah. And I think that's important, is like being willing to be corrected, and willing to, like, we all understand we're all going to make mistakes, and the difference between someone being intentionally harmful and someone making a mistake. And if you're part of a group that's been, you know, historically marginalized, I think the approach is important on how to talk about it. Some people, it can get exhausting. Like, I've gotten very, very tired talking about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict with people. Like, and I know it's important because, like, Americans are just not very educated on it. Like, spoiler alert, we have very biased news in America. And it can, like, lean very heavy one way. So, you know, I have a lot of friends and family that'll take the time to talk to people. And I'm just like, I don't know how many different ways I have to explain to you guys that it's wrong to forcibly remove an indigenous population from their home, bring in people from another country because God said it was cool. Like, I don't know how many different ways to explain that to somebody.
Well,
but
I'm
trying
that.
to, like,
so to acknowledge that in others, we'd have to acknowledge it in ourselves.
And what's funny, because, like, we'll turn around and we'll be like, oh yeah, it's so bad what we did here in America, but, like, we're not going to do anything to make up for it now. The past, suck it up. And then, like, it's happening somewhere else, and we're just going to be like, oh no, we're just going to ignore that. So it can be hard. Like, I get it. So for me, it's what I had to do is, like, learn how to talk to people and to be patient with people, right? I think it's very important. There are people that you're not going to convince them otherwise, right? Like, whether they're ignorant, they're racist, bigoted, insert whatever ism, right? They're not going to change their minds, and the best thing you can do, I think, is just be the better person and walk away. But when it comes to that teaching moment, to take that time to try to teach them. That's like, and you see this a lot with like, I hate to like bring this word up like this, right? But like the cancel culture thing can be very tricky, where it's like, if we're not careful and we're not allowing people to grow and to learn, you know what I mean, then we're going to alienate them. Some people are willing to learn. We can talk to them. We can have that healthy conversation. Let them ask their questions and try to educate them through the stereotypes and right. Because like, I'll be fully honest. When I was, and I'm so happy that I didn't have Twitter when I was in middle school. I used to be very homophobic, right? Like I grew up in a church that like used to preach about it like it was wrong and sinful and oh my God, it's disgusting. Until I moved schools, and the only moved cross country to Phoenix, and I had to make a new group of friends, and it was the theater kids, right? And so like,
speaking of
turns out
stereotypes,
there was a number of LGBTQ students in the theater, and so they right, like took the time to be like and I don't even know if we necessarily had the conversation. I think I just kind of looked around and I was like, what am I being so bigoted about, right? But had I had Twitter and I had said all these like dumb homophobic jokes and had that gotten drug up, I wouldn't have made some amazing friends, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity to, meet some amazing, wonderful people and realize that I just had these very ignorant ways of thinking things. Now there are some people that genuinely are mean and want to cause harm. And like I said, not much you can do about that. Right. Like, but yeah, that's where I'm kind of hesitant with like the cancel culture stuff. And I'm like, hey guys, we could be missing opportunity to allow people, and we need to give people the opportunity to grow, and if we're not careful, we can take that away from them, and just, they'll dig further and further into their corners of ignorance.
Yeah. Cancel culture it's a frustration in two ways. One, when that happens on its own, I get infuriated by, like, for instance, James Gunn was almost fired from the latest Marvel movie because of something that he said on Twitter, like, I forget how many years back, so that he wouldn't do today. And I just thought, it was his past and he has changed, and you've got to allow for that. But the other thing, the other frustration I have is sometimes I think things get called cancel culture that are not really cancel culture.
Or not.
Like the and I can't think of her name, but the actress from the Star Wars series, The Mandalorian.
Oh yeah, I know you're talking about.
She was posting like anti-Semitic comments on, like, I think it was Instagram. Well, that was happening right now, and she did that, and her employers, just like my employers would do to me, like, you know what, we're not going to do business with you. We don't want to be associated with that. To me, that's not cancel culture. That would have happened 10, 20 years ago. Yeah. I mean, you don't, there are just things you don't jump up and say in a public forum and not expect some kind of consequence for it.
You shouldn't say in a private forum either, but I 100% agree with you.
Yeah. So that's the thing with cancel culture. I've seen things called cancel culture, and I'm just like, you know what? That's not really cancel culture. That's
is it, or is it consequences of your actions?
Yeah. And I mean, and the other thing is, when it comes to when you work for a studio, being fired from a studio is not quite the same as being fired from a full-time job, because you bounce from job to job in that life anyway. So she'll land on her feet. She'll be fine.
Well, and like, we're straying a little off the original topic here, but that's fine. Someone mentioned the other day, no one has, listen, unless someone's like actually committed a crime, like, Harvey Weinstein or something like that, no one's ever been really canceled. Like,
true.
All the, like, Chris D'Elia out for a year, and now he's back doing his podcast and he's touring again. Like, right. Like, I mean, particularly if you're a white male in the media industry, whether it's entertainment or whatever, right? Like, no one's ever really gotten canceled. But yeah, back to the original point. As a Palestinian, I've had to learn to kind of like navigate those waters, and here's the other thing. As a Palestinian, I have to combat. I'm already starting behind a little bit, right? Because there's this automatic assumption that I'm anti-Semitic, right? That like, I hate Jews because I'm Palestinian, because the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So it's weird when someone's like, where you're from, I'm like, oh, I'm Palestinian. Because if they know anything about, like, or they might be like, oh, I don't know where that is, but okay, cool. They think it's Pakistan or something like that. Or like, or they know something about it. And then there's kind of like this, and I swear to God, Matt, I wish I was making this up. I've gotten people who are like on Palestinians, like, oh yeah, that's like near Israel and all that stuff, right? I'm like, yeah, whatever. And they're like, oh, so do you like hate Jews? Like those just straight up like this automatic assumption that like I'm anti-Semitic, which first of all makes no sense because I am a Semite. Like Palestinians are also Semites, so it really doesn't make any sense. Um, but it's hard because I have to then, if I want to criticize a policy of the state of Israel, um, I have to do it in the utmost diplomatic way possible. It kind of like be the equivalent of me being like, I think the country of Uganda has I don't know if it's still in effect today, but they used to have this like homosexuality used to be a crime in Uganda. Like you could get like, they're like, oh, you should be punishable by death. And if I was like, that's a bad policy, they need to change that. And you were like, why do you hate black people, Ramsey? And I'd be like, what? Not the same thing. So it's weird navigating that space as a Palestinian because like they assume you hate America, right? Like there are these assumptions that you hate America. There's assumptions that you hate all Jews. And therefore like I'm constantly having like to prove my like, nope, I'm not racist. I'm not anti-American. Like again, served in the Marine Corps. I dedicated my life to public service and national security, and large in part due to 9/11. Like I don't know if I'd be here if it was 9/11. Like there's no way to tell. But like that drastically changed the course of my life. And I was like, oh, well, I have knowledge of culture and I have knowledge of language. And like at that point I traveled overseas a couple of times as a kid and I continue to as an adult. And I want to dedicate my life to national security. And like it doesn't matter. I still have to like, right, like Gary from nowhere, Missouri, who likes guns, is somehow automatically more patriotic than I am, or I haven't approved myself backwards to him. So
Israel is something that it frustrates me because I have it's nothing like I'm sure your experience, but it's like it's like I'm not allowed to criticize Israel. It's like it's this holy land that can do no wrong, and it's like in the Bible Belt we are supposed to just support Israel no matter what they do. It's like
blind,
and I've looked throughout history. It's like, you know what? No, there's some bad stuff in the past. There's bad stuff happening now.
Sure.
They really need to get their act together. And it's like, I can't believe you would say that. It's like, well, why wouldn't I? I mean, I criticize my own country. Why wouldn't I criticize another one? I mean,
and you don't hate America. I love America. I want America to be the best. So I criticize us. If I see us doing wrong, I'm going to call us out.
Plus, to speak of Israel, I think I told him at one point, it's like, if we're going with the Bible, they did a whole lot of bad stuff in Israel. I feel like,
right.
It's okay to criticize.
It's so growing up in the Bible Belt, right? It was interesting being a Palestinian as well, because like that feeling is compounded in the church, and this like blind support, which like always confused me as an American. Like I love our allies, right? Whether it's, insert whatever country, right? But I don't feel like I have a blind loyalty to any of them past like what we do for our friends, right? But like, yeah, with it, like with Israel, there's this connection where it's like, if you love America and you're pro America, like you're also unwaveringly pro Israel. And it's like, but it's not like the way about like the UK, Canada, like any of these other countries that are good, close friends. It's like that one country. So navigating, criticizing, whether it's like, and I've quoted like international law where I'm like, oh, well, you see here, this action is a direct violation of international law. And it's like hard to criticize that. But like growing up in the Bible Belt, it's not only tied to it politically because the evangelical church is now one with like the conservative Republican movement, right? Like you go to a church now and you're like, how many voted Republican? Like they're all going to raise their hands, right? Like particularly where you and I like went to church growing up, right? Like they're all going to raise their hands. And so I've had people like say to I remember I came back from Palestine. I was there for like 5 months in 2012, and there was a conflict going on back and forth. and I was talking to this lady about it, and she's like particularly ignorant, and she straight up told me to my face that like the injustices happening to the Palestinians are justified because of what the Philistines did to the Israelites in the Bible. So like my grandparents not always having access to water or like freedom of movement in their own country is all okay because of some stuff that happened 2,000 years ago in the Bible. Which is even more frustrating now that I don't believe in like religion anymore. But that's like something I've like had to deal. And I straight up walked away. I was like, I'm going to slap you. I need to leave. Like, I don't want to get violent. That's the most ignorant thing I've ever heard in my life. But yeah, like the blind support, or not even like, so like, forget that like they're supporting another country. The approval for oppression on Palestinians and the just blanket okay of it from the Christian community growing up was a weird space to navigate, because not only did I feel like the other in school, it's like removed kind of you one step further in the church, in a place where like we're all supposed to be seen as children of God, right? Like we're all supposed to be equal in his eyes. And yeah, then you go to church where it's like very pro war. We got to go get all those dirty Arabs who attacked our country. And I'm like hoping they don't feel that way about me or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things, like I had a conversation with somebody else, like I wish I had something better to say than it is what it is, but so many times it just is what it is.
It just is what it is. Yeah, I think that's also
I guess the key
part
is
of
just
what made it like,
I was gonna say we got to keep trying, frustrating as it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me that's kind of what it made it like that much easier to be like, I won't really want anything to do with the church, right? Like I'm just like I don't know how many Palestinian kids have been killed this year by Israeli military or whatever, and it's just like not a word out of them for support. And it's like Jesus cared about these people, like Jesus cared about like the oppressed, and the
Jesus
just
was
mass
those people.
approval. Jesus was those people. That's a fun one.
Yeah.
To navigate people. It's like, yeah, Jesus looked a little bit more like me and a little bit less like you, Brian. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah. That was a revelation
for
me. Like I was 10 years old. So kudos to this minister who did this. This is in a Methodist church. Like I grew up in an extremely laid back version of Christianity. And it's probably why I still aspire to it, because my parents would be like compared to evangelicals, they're hippies. I mean, so laid back. Jesus loved everybody. And I think there were times if I ever asked my dad, do you think this person who did all these things went to heaven? He always gave me the same answer. He's like, I'm not their judge. That's for God to decide, not me. I don't know. Sure. And without fail. And they were the ones that actually were the first ones to say something to me about like talking about the gay community, because I came back from school spouting off homophobic things, and my parents, these lifetime church-going people, were the ones who said, you know what, not very accurate. You need to dial that down. That's not good. So I forget where I was going with that thought.
No. That's
yeah. Anyway,
I feel like a good example of like what should be like, right? Like the tolerance, the love, and the acceptance that I feel like I missed out on.
My frustration constantly is ever since I remember an interview with the guys from Monty Python, made the film The Life of Brian. If you haven't seen it, it is a phenomenal movie. It's not for everybody, but it's a great film.
Yeah.
But the plot is Brian was born in the manger next door to Jesus. Hilarity ensues. Well, They said when they made that film, they wanted to satirize religion. And they started looking at it and they said, we really can't satirize Jesus because we agree with pretty much everything he taught people to do. And my frustration has always been like, you know what, Christians, if you really focused on what Jesus said, then non-Christians really wouldn't have a problem with you. Like non-believers would say, this I may not be with you, but that all makes sense. That's a good thing, because he was all about take care of people around you, love everybody. And they get so hung up on this Old Testament stuff. It's like, guys, sometimes I want to tell them, like, they don't hate you because you're Christian. They hate you because you're a jerk.
Right. It's I was actually talking to my mom about this last week. I don't have like, despite my like distance from religion, from the church, I don't think I've strayed away from like the values I was taught. Like if anything now, I feel like I'm more closely aligned with them, which makes me feel closer to like if there is a Jesus out there, right? Like that. But yeah, can't remember where I was going with that. Yeah. So I feel like I still have those like values ingrained, like care about the poor, care about the sick, like help those in need, like love everybody, like regardless. Like there's no criteria to that. Like just and to bring that full circle, sometimes that's something that we missed as an Arab in an evangelical church growing up. The mix of the conservative Republican ideology, the pro-war movement that happened within the conservative, movement here in America, definitely like always made me feel uneasy because I always felt like it was just one small thing from that finger getting pointed over at me, right? And yeah, it's just not what it should have been. Right, like church should have been a safe place, and not that it was ever like dangerous, but like my sister experienced racism in school, which was at the church.
Well, and it's also, people don't think about this, but it's also not in the rest of our best interest as well. Like even for me, like because if you look back over the history, if you look at 9/11, there's a miniseries that came out on Netflix about it. I forget the full title of it, but it actually examined the days before, things that
Mm,
happened. And it's like 9/11 didn't just happen. Osama bin Laden didn't just jump up and say, you know what, let's knock down those
yeah,
buildings. They're about,
yeah,
there's a decade worth of things that happened that made him
yeah,
angry and made enough other people angry to start listening to him. And
yeah,
I forget who I had this conversation with, but they were getting really angry. Like, well, what are we supposed to do? Just give in to them? And I'm like, these are bad people. And it's like, okay, let's just assume they are. But if we, let's just say, gave in to them a little bit and 4,000 people didn't have to die, would it be worth it?
yeah.
Like, is a
Right.
black eye for America not worth a few thousand lives? And I felt like it was.
Yeah,
So, but
yeah. We definitely have a culture, and I mean, I can't say that I haven't been guilty of it myself, of like a certain amount of arrogance as Americans, right? Like we're the best and shouldn't have to bend for anyone, and um, yeah, that's it. And what you did through watching that documentary, and what the documentary might have stirred up or caused, was like, was this avoidable? Was there like a better way to do this? I think we need to be able to ask ourselves those hard questions. Otherwise, like it's going to happen again, and it's going to happen again.
and I think we're doing things that are potentially leading to it happening again.
Sure, yeah,
So,
and that's where criticizing policies or actions or whatever is a good thing to do. It's something we should be doing in a free society. It's just something that sometimes Arabs have to, like I said, walk that line carefully. Or if you're anyone in my family, just say it bluntly and don't care what anyone else thinks about you. um, yeah,
that's
but
refreshing.
it can be. Yeah, man. Yeah, I have family who would just be like, just openly, just insert their political or social opinion and just don't give a crap what other people think about them, which can be good, can be bad. Just
For Thanksgiving dinner, it's awesome.
yeah. It's funny because like I have family who like you'll know what they think of you, and sometimes people be like, oh well, with them, what you see is what you get, and I'm like, well, we got a jerk, guys. Sorry to tell it to you, like we got a jerk. Um, yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, because like right with my current job, working in the government, my experience being in the military, um, wasn't any, like you still see like remnants of the hesitation. The is he going to be combative? Is he going to be whatever? Particularly around like the discussion of Israel, because people just assume that I'm like, I want Israel to burn to the ground. And that's like nothing I've ever said. I've like never spouted hate towards like any group of people. yeah, it's definitely made up my professional life pretty interesting. Do you remember that episode, not episode, that level in Super Mario where like it's moving constantly and you're trying to jump over all the fire stuff and like
Hated
the
those
thing, you know
levels.
what I'm talking about?
Hmm.
Yep, that is what is like trying to like articulate a criticism of like America or Israel as a Palestinian in America without coming off as anti-American or anti-Semitic. It's exactly like that. Like one small thing, and it's like you could say something, and it's like, oh well, Matt has an opinion, and they're not like blah blah. And like for me, it's like, oh, well, Ramsey just hates America because he's Arab, and like they're all angry people over there, which is something I heard someone say in college once. We're in a like my politics class, and this guy was like, yeah, I served over there, and you cannot reason with those people. They are angry. It is in their culture, and like there's nothing you can do about it. And I'm like sitting 5 feet behind him. Cool.
Yeah.
But he like was like a wounded Iraq vet. I was like, I'm not gonna say anything. This guy's gonna turn around and kill
it does come back to like I would want to just say like let's just assume you're right and they are just all angry. Why? They weren't
Yeah.
born that way. What happened? And
Right.
that's a question nobody likes answering. It's like, well, why? Because eventually when you ask why, you got to take a little bit of responsibility. And that's one thing I think in America we're not very good at is owning some of our mistakes. We're
Yeah.
trying to whitewash the history books as is in some states. So
Yeah. Well, and it's funny is like I saw something like Loudoun County, which is like not far from here in Virginia, but probably an hour away from where I'm at. It was like, we don't want critical race theory being taught in our school and for our kids. And it's like, stop. First of all, that's like master's level.
it's not being taught anywhere.
So I don't know what elementary school your kid's going to, but they might be baby geniuses if they're already studying critical race theory. But it's funny because like now Loudoun County is looking at the impacts of segregation on the Black community in Loudoun County and how they can like essentially make amends for that. And I'm like, so you guys are studying the impacts of discrimination and segregation on the Black community, and you plan on paying them reparations now? Like literally what critical race theory like talks about, like the impact of these policies. And so it's funny how they like talk themselves in full circle. But that just goes to show like the fear mongering, right? Back to the first part of what you and I were discussing, like this fear mongering of like the other and the unknown. It's like, oh, they're coming to get you. There's nothing ever wrong with like being like, is what we're doing or what we did okay? If not, why was it not okay? And like, how can we do better? I think that's a conversation that like we need to have as Americans, that politically, socially. Sometimes people don't want to because it's going to be uncomfortable, and that requires me being like, I used to be homophobic and bigoted. I'm sorry. I apologize. I was an ignorant kid, and I can and will do and be better. A lot of people just don't want to do that.
And the thing about, like I mentioned, whitewashing history books, that's something that really bothers me right now. Because I mean, okay, my history that I got was pro-America. I'm not going to say that it was just critical.
Sure.
It's like, we're good, but they didn't sugarcoat some of the bad things that we did. Like my teachers, I remember, were very honest with what we did to the Native Americans here.
Yeah.
The Trail of Tears, and just how we just kept pushing them farther and farther off. Like, okay, you can live here. Okay, no. There's valuable resources there. You move over here, and just keep worse places. And then, of course, slavery. They didn't whitewash that one to me. They said, yeah, we did this. It was bad, and we stopped doing it. And the South are the ones who wanted to do it. And now it's like I don't know. I hear talks about like reworking the history books, and I'm kind of worried about my kids entering into it. I'm asking myself like, okay, am I going to have to review the textbooks that they use and then have to like supplement it? Like, okay, look, here's some of what really happened, guys, because you need to know this.
Here's some extra pages they can give you. It's funny because like, I don't know where you grew up in. Where did you grow up in?
West Kentucky.
Okay, got it. So I don't know what it was like in West Kentucky. I've like driven through it, really pretty state. In North County, St. Louis, like you've dropped me off a million times at my house. Did you ever see a Confederate statue anywhere?
Not that I remember.
And I somehow learned all about the Civil War, right? Like magically was able to do it without these like Confederate statues around. So I think it's really funny. People are like, they're trying to erase history. It's like,
Well,
So
there's
nobody in New York knows about the Civil War? Because
yeah.
I was just there recently and
You know, the
didn't see
fun
a single statue anywhere.
Yeah, the fun thing about that, so many of those statues that are getting torn down, they weren't built after the Civil War. They were built in the 60s as sort of a middle finger to the civil rights movement. And so it's like,
Right.
we're not really tearing down history. We're tearing down like
Yeah.
a metaphorical middle finger. And is that really a bad thing?
Right.
Meanwhile,
Right.
there was some, I forget where this was, but there was some little town that had it was like this cement block that legitimately had been used in slave trading, and they never got rid of it. And they were saying, we need to smash this thing, get rid of it. And I was in the background screaming, no, take it away from the town square, but put that thing in a
Put it in a
museum.
museum somewhere so
That
we
is
can learn and remember.
that is important. Put that thing
Yeah.
there. I mean, if we're going to maintain Auschwitz, we need to maintain that block. That block is
Right.
vital to know, like, okay, we did this. Let's not do it again. But
Right. Right. People
yeah,
do a lot of things when they're scared, man. And it's unfortunately something that's easy to get people to rally behind. I don't understand the human psyche and why that is, but we saw that during the civil rights movement, and we saw it, in post 9/11 America, right? Like we are united, but we're uniting against them. Um, and yeah, no, it's interesting, particularly being like the national security world too, right? Like the guy who interviewed this really interesting podcast for the guy who interviewed Saddam Hussein, who interrogated him for like 5 months, I want to say, but he's like a Lebanese-born FBI agent who like knew the language, and then they were like, "We need somebody who speaks Arabic. You're going to go now." Got a lot of important information out of that guy, out of Saddam, right? That guy was like super, super critical, but had he been, having these policies of, and I'm not saying we do or like, right, but like, how do we let our fear get us to the point where it's like, oh, like you have family in Lebanon, therefore there's no way you can be patriotic American. We're not going to allow you to serve in the FBI. That might be something we would have missed out on. You know what I mean? There could have been a lot of information that and Saddam was able to relate to this guy because they were both Middle Eastern. He spoke Arabic at a level that, Saddam Hussein was able to relate to and understand. And there's like a connection they were able to have. At one point, Saddam said, "I'm closer to you than I was ever to my sons." And that's like something that like maybe could have never happened if, we had these, you used to not be able to get a security clearance if you had family overseas. It's like, well, how many like people with like those language skills are we missing out on because their parents are immigrants, and you know what I mean? So
yeah. Well, the one story that I remember when people talk about 9/12 that I've never forgot. I wish I could remember this guy's name, and I was trying to look it up, but since I couldn't remember his name, I wasn't really sure where to look. Um, he was an ambulance driver who, in the days afterwards, he was strongly suspect. He was of Arabic descent. And there was strong suspicion he was unaccounted for that he was involved in the bringing down the Twin Towers. And lo and behold, after they kept looking, they found out he was actually in the rubble, but he was there because, as a first responder, he was doing his job, going in, getting people out, and he was actually one of the heroes who perished. But for weeks, I think 1 or 2 weeks, there was suspicion, and his family was under suspicion. And when it came out that he was actually a hero, I don't think anybody came back to apologize. I think it's just like, oh wow, he was a hero. Well, we were wrong, and then everybody kind of walked away, and the families kind of looked like, hey, you kind of demonized him and us
put
for a
us
couple
through
of
hell.
weeks there.
Yeah, yeah.
And oh,
So
and by
not
the
only are
way,
they dealing with like,
by the way, we lost our son. So
yeah, exactly. So not only are we dealing with the loss of a family member and we're grieving, but you put us through hell for it.
but it was because he was of Middle Eastern descent. Like any other first responder who was missing, they would have
Yeah,
just assumed, oh well, probably died in the towers. But because
yeah,
of
yeah.
because he was of that descent and had a name that sounded Middle Eastern, the immediate suspicion was. And yeah, I wish I could remember that guy's name, because that guy deserves some kind of memorial in his honor for that, because
Right.
right there, like, what
Yeah.
more heroic thing could you have done? Like, you look up, they're probably coming down, but I got to go help people, and he did it.
Right. Yeah, and I don't want this to seem like every single person in America is racist and bad and discriminated against people. You know what I mean? That wasn't, at least it wasn't my experience with it, right? But yeah, I definitely did want to like just shed light on the fact that like, hey guys, like America has flaws like every other country and like every other society. And I think to plug your ears and stomp your feet and say no, like we're not. I read something somewhere. It's like just because someone else's pain makes you uncomfortable doesn't mean that like you can ignore it, like it didn't happen, right? Like sometimes like people don't want to hear about these things happening because they have this like rose-colored idea of like our society, and they want to hear the best in our society, right? And they want to know that like we're full of good people, and we are. There's a lot of great here, but we can't improve unless we hear about people's experiences and not invalidate them. That's like the other thing is like just because I never experienced physical assault, as that's like you and I, Matt, being like, it's not dangerous outside. I don't ever get in my car and lock the doors immediately. What are you talking about? Every other woman sitting there like, really? It's easy for you and I to say that. Like I'm 6 feet tall and 225 pounds. Like not a lot of people are gonna like try to mug me in the middle of the night. So I think it's important to just like listen to people's stories and try to examine how there's a good chance that someone did something somewhere, right? Like anyone listening to this or that might have like negatively impacted somebody, right? And I'm not saying you did it intentionally or anyone was like malicious about it. It's the unfortunate reality of the society that we live in. But if we can't have these conversations like you and I are having, if we can't listen to these stories, like how the hell are we going to get any better?
Yeah. And from my own perspective, I've looked back and I've sometimes wondered, like, did I ever do something without even thinking about it that made someone uncomfortable? And like, I forget who said this, but that's what makes racism so insidious is that, like, the people who don Klan robes and set crosses on fire, well, there's no debate that we know who they
Right.
are. They're right out there with it. But those of us who you grow up in it, and even if you don't consider yourself racist and really truly aren't, there's still like this stuff just gets in your head without you quite realizing it. And yeah, and that's why there's so many times like you have these things like white splaining where like a white guy thinks he's got it all figured out. Like, well, I know your story because I worked with a Latina woman. It's like, well, no, you don't. You just worked with a person
20 years ago,
yeah,
right?
that's one person out of however many this demographic includes, and it's so easy to fall into that trap. You just assume you know about a group because you met a few people. It's like, well, no, there are so many, and like so.
What kills me is like like someone who hears about like the exception, right? So like someone who I made the effort to listen to and formulate my own opinion rather than just hate them because I'm a good liberal and I hate them. It's like Candace Owens, right? I was like, let me listen to her, let me see the things she has to say, and I'm going to form my opinion. It turns out I can't say anything she says, but something I've seen her kind of fall back on a lot was like, well, I made it out. I never experienced this. I never experienced that. Therefore, like, that's not a problem. But like, if you know somebody of, a Latino who is like, they're like, oh, I don't want to talk about like America's not racist. I thrive here, and where I come from would have been awful. And it's like, great, I'm glad they have a positive experience, but the exception's very rarely the rule, right? Like,
well, and I'd venture to say some of those who say, I never experienced anything. It's like, I'll bet you did. Somewhere in your life, it's impossible that you didn't bump into something. And however slight or minor it might have been, it's worth at least trying to make the effort to improve.
Yeah, or they didn't realize they experienced that, whether how small or large it was. But I still made it. I was still successful. I was still like whatever, and it's like great. Not everybody experiences that. So I think like not negating people's experiences is like something that's really important, especially when it makes you uncomfortable. So like, growing up a child in the 90s, like I heard, these dumb misogynistic jokes. And I remember I used to like say them all the time to my buddies. Look back at it now and I'm like, those are extremely misogynistic and not cool. Like I was casually joking around about like abusing women, right? Because like, oh, it was funny. And it's not, like it never was funny. Um, but like it's important for me to be like understand that I probably said that around someone and a woman and made them uncomfortable. And like I need to own that. And whether it's in the form of that, or whether it's in the form of racism or like what have you, I think it's important for people to be able to look back at themselves and accept the fact that like we're all flawed, we've all made mistakes. What are you doing now? My sister taught me a really important lesson. There's a moment between like receiving information and then making your like and acting on like that information. So we all have inherent biases. That's just a result of living in the world. And I don't care where in the world you are, everybody has some kind of biases towards something in some fashion. You're not racist because you saw a Middle Eastern person and you immediately thought was like, terrorist, right? It's like, because we all grew up in post 9/11 America. This is just like, right, the associations we make. It's what you do after that that really matters to me. Like, did you not invite that colleague out to drinks with everybody else because they make you uncomfortable? Did you, maybe not give that person a promotion or like what have you, right? But like it's the action on it that really matters. And yeah, so I think that moment in between like getting that first initial uncomfortability and then your decision, I think is where change is made. And I think that's where like people need to like evaluate.
I agree. This has been great.
Dude, I like this. This was fun.
I think that's an upbeat moment to end things on. That was good.
Oh, I'm happy. I'll credit Suzanne for that. So,
okay. We'll let her know one way or another, via social media or text or something.
I'll give her a call tomorrow.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, thanks again. I appreciate it. And I'll let you get back to what I know is an incredibly busy schedule.
Oh, so you're the one with 2 kids, and you're way busier than I am. So, Matt, it was great catching up with you, man. We'll stay in touch. And thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Hey, if you haven't already, be sure to visit the official Shore Manor online t-shirt shop, the purveyors of all things spooky and all things Halloween, as long as it's in t-shirt form. You can find it at mattshore.net. Just click on shop at the top of the page. And while you're there, be sure to use the promo code journalist and get 10% off of everything in the store. Once again, that's mattshore.net and click on shop at the top of the page. All right. Thank you, Rumsey. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me, and thanks for your voice. It's an important one, and it's one that we need to hear. And also, if you guys are still listening to me at this point, then thanks for sticking around. Thanks for hearing the entire conversation. Just for the record, I want to say America really is a wonderful nation. It truly is, and I truly believe that. And I just think it's important that we acknowledge areas where we come up short, areas that need some work. Um, that's how we stay wonderful, and that's how we can, potentially become even more wonderful than we are now. We don't have to stay in one spot. We can always keep moving, keep trying to make things better. And I think that's what one of the things that has made America such a wonderful place throughout its history is that ongoing uh, endeavor to improve ourselves. So it'll always be that way. We'll always have issues that we deal with, and even when we solve some, new ones will pop up, sometimes created by solving the old ones. But that doesn't mean we give up. We've got to keep working. It's an ongoing thing, and for every generation, we will continue to have to face problems, find ways to deal with them, and that's just life. Um, if the true victory, I guess, if you will, is to not shy away from those problems, but to continue facing them, no matter how exhausting it may be. Just keep up the good work and keep up the good fight. Really, nothing else that I can add to this conversation. Probably not even a whole lot of point in saying all of that because we really touched on it. Really illuminating and great conversation that I was able to have with an old friend. So I'll just get ready to close things out and move over to the cheap plugs of this conversation. As I mentioned at the outset, I do have a Patreon page with content going up on a weekly basis. I would love it if you would check that out. We have subscriptions as low as $1 a month, and Everything gets you something. So please feel free to check that out. Go over to patreon.com/Matt Shore. Also, my wife and I launched our own YouTube show, The Shore Manor Chronicles, which is all about our spooky adventures centered around Halloween. Please feel free to check that out. And speaking of YouTube and all things social media, this podcast is a part of Shore Manor Studio, which you can find on Facebook and on YouTube. Please look us up there and like, follow, and subscribe. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Shore Manor and on YouTube by going to tinyurl.com/Shore Manor YouTube. All of this show's episodes are there in their entirety and now with video, so please check that out. You can also sign up for our official newsletter at tinyurl.com/Shore Manor Newsletter, where you'll be able to be the first to hear about announcements, discounts, and giveaways, so please don't miss that. And if you want to look us up on our official website, just head over to www.mattshore.net, where you'll find this and previous episodes archived. Just click on the podcast link at the top of the page. And finally, if you would like to connect with me directly, you can do so on Twitter at @TheMattShore, on Instagram at The Shore, and on TikTok at The One Matt Shore. That's the number one Matt Shore. And finally, of course, there is email. If you want to connect the old fashioned way, it's mattshore@hotmail.com. So thanks for checking out this episode. I hope you have a good rest of the year and hope you'll keep checking out future episodes. So keep listening, keep reading. Thanks.